I'm Katie, the founder of Flexible Working People, and I am joined today by two of our Flexible Working People experts, Ursula Tavender and Liese. Liese and Ursula work with businesses that want to move towards a more flexible and inclusive work culture. And today's conversation is going to be offering businesses some practical advice and strategies for those who are grappling with what's next. When they're working through what the workplace looks like after COVID and lockdown. Not that we're actually out of it yet, but we've talked a lot about it. So I know that lots of companies are still working through that kind of the what next piece, because it's been such a new experience for everybody. So I just want to kick off maybe with Ursula. Can you tell us what you think, in your experience, businesses have found particularly tough over the last few months, and maybe what they've been surprised by, so what's worked and what they found quite challenging?
Yeah, I think what surprised them is how resilient they are and how quickly they can change when they need to. And you know, Liese and I talk a lot about the why and the purpose, and when you have a very clear reason for doing something, everybody can get on board with it. So I think that, you know, to start with the positive, the thing that surprised businesses is how quickly their entire organisation can shift to a new way of working when it's needed. And I think that's very reassuring, and it's meant that people have overcome, you know, the fears and resistances that they had to trying flexible ways of working, which is very, very positive. I think they've struggled with communication a lot in a lot of cases, and trust. So that would have happened anyway, and in a lot of cases, because a lot of cultures do leave something to be desired when it comes to a really strong trust culture. So I think they're the two biggest challenges. I think, you know, in addition to the logistics and all that kind of stuff, now that people have embedded this way of working.
Okay. So, I mean, it has been a massive change, significant change, you know, almost the entire workplace has gone to working from home. Do you think, Liese, that businesses will just return to normal once we're out of this? How do you see that sort of transformation happening? Or do you think that, that actually this will have a massive impact and change the workplace for the future?
Excuse me, I think I'm really hopeful that it will change the workplace of the future. And I know there's huge momentum that's being built because people want it to be different. All of the surveys are revealing, I would say 83% upwards, closer to 100 in most surveys, percent of people want to have a choice over the where, when and how of work. So I think businesses are going to be under a lot of pressure. Some firms and organisations have already made the decision that people won't be going back for some months to the workplace in the way that it was, and others are already looking at what can we do differently. But ironically, I was stuck in rush hour traffic the other evening thinking there's an awful lot that have already gone back, and I feel that there will be a resentment building up if organisations don't start to think what can we do differently to keep engagement, motivation and performance going. I think it's going to be a real talent deal breaker for people now.
I agree. Actually, I've just done a survey myself, and the results were just overwhelming. So over 60% said they wanted an 80-20% split to be at home, and 30 said they wanted a 50, and only 9% said they wanted sort of an 80% in the office. So overwhelmingly right now, that's what people want. So, and I think they voted with their feet, and practical strategies now. Go on.
No, sorry, we froze. And I think that's important because our personalities play a big part in how we work. And that's the little bit that's underestimated. You know, you can't really write an enforceable policy for this. You can have guidelines and boundaries, but you have to let people be people and really shine in the way that they shine best.
Yeah. So what do you think's next? So you two do this all day long, and a lot of these businesses, I said, what's next? Going through this right now, what should they be thinking about? What should they be doing to think about how they bring people back into the workplace and how to create this sort of more agile work culture?
So one of the things that I talk about a lot, that I do a lot because it's very, very effective, is work through a process of embedding a team charter for teams. And when Lisa and I have collaborated and worked together, we always say that taking a team approach to embracing flexible working makes much more sense to us, because, you know, to build on Lisa's point, everybody's different, every role is different, every team is different. And equity in a business doesn't mean having a blanket policy at a company-wide level that everybody, you know, interprets differently. You know, there's going to be pockets of the business that are thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me because that won't, you know, that won't work for me. Whereas when you do things at a team level, everyone is able to feed into that process and design what flexible working looks like for them and for their team based on what they need to deliver for the business. So that is something that is working very, very well. We've talked about it a lot before, haven't we? And that, if we're going to talk about practical strategies, then, you know, that would be a great place to start, is to take a team approach and look at what is going to work for that team, what options are possible, and how do we make it work, what do we need to make it work as people, as individuals, as a manager. And that then feeds into the performance management side of things, and, you know, moving towards that culture of outcomes based on outcomes rather than hours and input.
So are you suggesting that we're sort of moving away from this flexible working arrangement as an application process? Do you think that, what does the future look like for that? So currently people have to make a flexible working request, don't they, to get flexible working in their organisations. How do you think that will play out? Do you think companies are going to sort of throw those out the window, reinvent them, start, like, what do you think will happen in that respect? Lisa, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, no, so I think that a true flexible working culture almost completely negates the need for formal applications. You know, the legislation's there with you know, a good heart, but actually it's made flexible working sort of stigmatized and quite difficult to achieve. True flexible working is very much based on what the business needs, blending in the personal preferences and your needs, and actually focusing on what's got to be delivered and by when, because we're in this contract to deliver the work. And I think that really helps shift away from the need for a formal flexible working process. I mean, when I've implemented it myself as an HRD previously, we removed the need for formal flexible working requests. We had 1 in 3 years. It completely dropped off the face of the earth.
Very interesting.
Because teams sorted it out themselves, and that enabled you to be fluid through your life cycle as well, because life changes. You've got different things happen at different times, and it you know, formal flexible working can be a little inflexible.
Right. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing here then is do away a bit, or in time, companies should do away with that sort of formal arrangement and start to work independently with their teams to establish what's right overall for each team, using the team charter approach that Ursula talked about. Okay. So one of the things that comes up all the time, and I think companies have really found really challenging, is that culture piece. Mm-hmm. So I know that you've both got thoughts on this, but it would be really good to have that conversation now and sort of give some thought as to, you know, when we're working remotely, when some people are in the office and some are at home, sort of how do you maintain that workplace culture? Do you have any top tips on that, Ursula?
So for me, this starts with leadership, and I think that it is absolutely vital that at every level of the organisation you have that clear messaging and that kind of clarity of thought and of support and of encouragement and of living and breathing a flexible working culture, by example, from the top. And when that happens, it's like a virtual permission slip for everyone. And, you know, when we see what's possible, we can model it ourselves, can't we? So, you know, when you see leaders around their kitchen table with their iPhone doing a broadcast to everybody with their kids running around or their dogs running around, that makes it okay. And I think that's what lockdown has given us, is that freedom to be more human. So many more leaders, and I've had conversations with staunchly, people that are staunchly opposed to flexible working traditionally because they just think it wouldn't work. You know, I'm talking about, sales directors who are just, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Our sales process works, our teams work, the dynamics they have in the office. Why would we change it? Yeah. And so what they've done is they've done some development on themselves, and, they've embraced change at a pace which none of us have been used to. And I think when that happens, it just accelerates everything. And so I think when you have that kind of commitment, but you also have the commitment to work on trust and equip people to have better conversations, because there's so much fear, and that's where the culture gets blocked. You know, where managers have fear around, well, how am I going to manage that, and what happens if people want different things? This isn't about treating everybody the same. It's about working on trust, working on communication, and that leadership piece. And when you have those elements, there's more to it, obviously. I'm really paraphrasing, but you know, that's a great start.
So Lisa, I know that you've got strong feelings on culture, because we've talked about this a lot. So just want to get your view on this as well. So what are your thoughts on sort of culture in the workplace, and how we enforce that culture in sort of a remote environment?
You know, culture is literally about the way you do things around here. So the leadership, the role modelling, giving managers confidence is another really critical part of the cultural shift. And it's about agreeing good behaviours and calling out the behaviours that don't align with the way that we want the culture to move to. So having that end game, having the vision of where we want to get to, why we want to do it, what it looks like, what the right behaviours are, and then calling out the behaviours that aren't, but in a compassionate way, in a coaching way that helps people learn and develop. We're changing habits. We're changing habits that have been embedded over, you know, decade. I mean, it's such a big shift from organisations. But the bigger the momentum, the faster the change, and the more it keeps going. And encouraging people. I think it's so empowering, and we've seen that in lockdown, that when people have had that freedom and flexibility, you know, albeit we've had extreme situations, people don't want to go back. They've realised the benefits, they've realised how productive they can be. And I think when we connect with that and we understand why, then that makes us do things much more readily, doesn't it?
Yeah, and if you've got teams doing different things, how do you bring people together? Like, should there be some structure in the office and some out? Like, how do you start to think about that? Because I know that from talking to businesses, there's this sense that well, we need some time together. Can't all be remote. So what does that look like? How do we implement that so that people have that flexibility, but equally we do get that together time? How does that work? Ursula, do you want to cover that?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I think, again, that's where the team approach really helps, because that will look different for every team and every business and every role depending on what they do. And I think that the really beautiful benefit of having those conversations at that level is that you can design something that works for you all. So it's really impossible to say, well, I think it should be that 20% of time is face to face, because, you know, that will depend on the people. You know, there are, I think, very exciting conversations happening about the democratization and participation options. So, you know, just because everybody's always been in the office for this quarterly conference or meeting, does it have to be that way? And some introverted people are saying, well, actually, I'd feel much more confident to contribute more openly if I was working remotely and dining in. And so I think what's really exciting is that, you know, through those conversations of you know, exploring the possibilities, that's where you'll come up as an organisation and as a team with what works for your people based on who they are and based on the manager. And this, you know, kind of feeds into the conversations that the point that Lisa made just now around equipping managers with confidence. I think when they're able to work together with teams, that gives them that as well, because they can have those open discussions that lead to that sense of autonomy and that sense of, well, everybody's bought into this process because we've all designed it together. And so the fears around how it's going to be managed, because you've had conversations about, you know, to agree what that looks like, that falls away.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that's concerning is out of sight, you don't feel like you have control over what people are delivering. And I know that this is something that comes up a lot. So do you start to think about measuring people's results in a different way? So often, and historically, it's always been, well, you know, you can see what people are doing and delivering. So Lisa, what are your thoughts on sort of how companies think about measuring success in this sort of new world where they're not necessarily in front of you and you feel you're lacking control over over how they work and where they work?
Yeah, and I think this is where we're really overturning lots and lots of years of how we used to manage, and managing by visibility isn't necessarily the best way to manage. So I think it is very much about switching to the outcomes culture and defining outcomes, and every team can define those, and using that in conjunction with the team charter approach that Ursula and I both praise highly and recommend. And it's about connecting at the beginning of the week. What do we need to achieve? Who needs support? It's the manager really steps up to being more of a coach as much as a manager. Who needs support? What do we need to do to achieve? To take a phrase from Ursula, we check in on the Wednesday, how's it going? And then check out on the Friday and celebrate. And keeping that sort of structure enables teams to stay engaged. They're focused on what they need to deliver. It's not about hours in the day, you know, we can only work 9 to 5. It's about delivering when it's best for you and when you're most creative, or whatever task and aptitude you need. And I feel that that's the best way, is focusing on an outcomes culture. So for many, it will be flipping how they manage performance, but actually it's so much more tangible when you do it that way. And then it's building that manager confidence again in, I can trust my people because I can't see them.
Yeah.
How else can I communicate with them so that they feel supported, but not that I'm watching over them and micromanaging.
I love that. And I think that all stems down to the whole trust piece, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's, if you don't trust the people who work for you, then you're on a losing battle anyway. And if you trust that they're going to deliver and do as they need to, you're winning the battle. So look, we've all been forced into this whole sort of working from home much faster than anyone would have thought. And it's moved forward the flexible working story by sort of years, decades maybe, hasn't it? I mean, we sort of never dreamt that this would happen. And so I know that none of us have got a crystal ball, but I thought it might just be nice to finish on, because you've given some really good advice. So how do you see this working out? I'm seeing lots of businesses already having these amazing conversations about what this looks like now. Do you think this is here to stay? Or do you think that people will sort of, as soon as COVID's disappeared completely, everyone will pull their people back into the offices and at their desks? Ursula, what do you think?
Like you, Katie, I am heartbroken that it's taken this kind of event to propel the conversation about flexible working to the top of the agenda. But I think it gives me so much hope that there is this kind of silver lining. You know, this is the kind of thing that people like the three of us have been fighting for years. And so the potential here is transformative for so many demographics of people, and it will give people more choice about how they work, and actually accessibility to work, which is the best thing ever. You know, there's so many people who will have more options, and therefore they'll be able to earn differently, and they'll be able to contribute to society differently, they'll feel differently. So that, for me, the people story in this, beyond the pandemic tragedy, is really, really cause for a lot of optimism and hope, I think. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of open-mindedness, and that is so encouraging at this point, because Liese and I noticed at the very start of lockdown there was understandably sheer panic, and so we were thinking, you know, this is the opportunity this industry has been waiting for, really. And we could see what was about to happen. But when you're in it, in the thick of trying to move an entire organisation to remote working in 5 minutes flat, you know, the panic that set in for a good month, wasn't it, Liese? You know, took a while to subside, and now that's subsided, and you know, we've going through different phases of the change curve, I think, and we're coming up the other end. I think that what's happening is that leaders are being led by others. The conversation has been amplified everywhere you look, hasn't it? In mainstream media, you know, everybody's talking about this giant remote working experiment that we've been subjected to and embraced simultaneously. And I think those that are thinking about, because I have heard stories about people that are determined to get everybody back to the office where they can see them the minute that they can, ultimately it will become a competition for talent. There will be you know, people will have more choice about where and how they work. So they will leave if they're not able to find the flexibility that they want, or the culture that they want, and that you know, this sort of event, a pandemic that people have, you know, experienced in different ways, I think changes the way that you see the world, doesn't it? You know, it makes us more resilient, but it also brings us, there's so many people having conversations in your group as well, you know, where people are saying, this made me think so differently about my life, and it's put everything to perspective. People are not going to put up with organisations that don't trust them, that don't want them to flourish as people, that don't embrace the fact that they have lives outside of work, that don't believe that their personal lives and experiences can benefit them at work. That's going to be a thing of the past, and it may not be immediate, but those that are resistant will come along eventually. Otherwise, I don't think they will be able to survive long term. That's my view.
I completely agree. What do you think, Liese?
Yeah, I completely agree with Ursula. I mean, we're always on the same page.
Always.
But I think in addition to that, it's, you know, I'm already seeing people expecting their organisations to go back to office, but I'm seeing more who are taking the time to pause and reflect. Okay, where are we? How do we build a more resilient business? How do we help people be more resilient in anticipation for not only, God forbid, another wave, but also what the future holds for different businesses? And I think that the Brené Brown phrase, courage is contagious, is coming into my head. The more people step up and voice their feelings about, I actually do want to work flexibly, I don't want to be penalised for not being able to work flexibly or wanting that choice. I think the more voices that get together, the more change will happen. And what's fabulous about, you know, the lockdown situation is some of those voices, or a lot of those voices, are now managers and leaders. For the first time, they've actually had their own pilot, and they really do want to change. And I'm talking to people that, like Ursula, staunch office bound people who've said, I'm not going back to the office full time. And I literally do little cheers, because having that choice and freedom to go and work in the way that suits you, whether it's 80-20, whether it's 60-40, whether it's one thing one week and one thing another, that is such an amazing thing to have, that choice, privilege, and ability to adapt to your life and enjoy both work and life.
So as always, you two wonderful experts in this brought so much knowledge and insights into this. If people want to work with you, and you're both experts in the group and they can both contact you directly, but they should come to the group and come to the website, and they can both get in touch with you, and you can work with them and help them if they need it in helping to make this transformation. So thank you very much to both of you. I found that fascinating, even though I'm hugely involved in all of it. I still learn so much when I talk to you both. But thank you for your time, and see you soon.
Thanks, Katie. I've loved it.
Great time. Thank you so much. Bye for now.